Hey, y'all, did y'all miss us? Because we show missed you. Look, watch, like, and subscribe to our channel at Sister Sis 1988, as well as follow us on all our social media platforms at Sister Sis 1988. We have a wonderful show here today for you. Let me start off by introducing myself, though. My name is Jamie.
I'm Latoya.
And I'm Calandra.
And we have a wonderful and exciting guest coming to us out of Waxahachie. We are going to call her Miss Mama Fox. And go ahead and introduce herself. Tell us just a little bit about herself before we jump into these questions. Go ahead, Miss Mama Fox.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm Mama Foxfire. I am in Texas also, single mom, mental health advocate, part-time live show podcasting host. I've lived through a lot in my life, and I'm just kind of here to share my story, and I appreciate y'all having me on.
And we appreciate you for being on. So let's go ahead and jump into this because people are excited to hear. Go ahead, Toya.
All right. So let's start off by talking about your podcast, Even Tacos Fall Apart. Where did that idea come from?
So I guess to kind of short a long story, I strongly believe that if the stigma around mental health and talking about mental health were not so bad, that my grandfather would still be with us today. And if you want the long version, I can go into the long version as well.
Okay.
That's essentially what my motivation was.
Okay. So
okay.
About it a little bit. That's fine.
So I mean,
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, the longer version is that my grandfather did go missing in 2017, and the events that led to his disappearance are what motivated me to A, start gaming again, which is a big part of the show, and B, be honest about how I was doing with people, because I was going through such a traumatic thing in my life, and collectively my whole family was, that it was hard not to talk about it because people were asking, it was very public. People were checking in, people were trying to, like, even people I didn't know were reaching out on social media and saying, like, hey, I saw that was that your grandfather on the news? And so it was very public. And I started streaming because my gaming friends thought it would be funny to see me, in addition to kind of hear my reactions to games, which are fairly emotive, I'll say. And I didn't stop talking about how I was doing just because I was streaming. So I started doing these streams where I was gaming and just talking about how I was doing. And it turned into more of like, well, let's just talk about like how we're doing and how are you doing and how am I doing? And so it kind of led into these discussions on Twitch. And then I started doing Mental Health Monday interviews on stream with mental health professionals where people could ask questions of a professional. Because I don't work in mental health. I'm not a mental health professional. I was just going through some stuff in my life. so I started doing that. And that's kind of where the podcast came in. It just was like a continuation of what I was doing on stream. And so I branded as Even Tacos Fall Apart in 2023, just about a year ago, a little more than a year ago. And I think kind of the desire and goal and motivation is just to reach people who are going through some stuff in their lives and let them know that we all have these moments of despair and we all have these moments where life feels like it's really falling apart. And we all experience things like pain and grief and sorrow and sadness and everything. Like that's part of life. It just is. But there's also always room to pick up those pieces and to kind of pick up your metaphorical taco and make it into a little plate of nachos or burrito or whatever you want to do. And the community around the podcast is just such a supportive space that it feels like it's somewhere safe to be authentic. And even if you're having a messy moment, it's just something that is that safe haven. And I think if more people had been willing to talk about mental health back in 2017, my grandfather might still be here. So that's kind of a winding way of saying, why the hell did you start a podcast?
Got it. So please discuss your journey with depression. Like, when did it first start?
Yeah, so I've experienced depression in a couple of different forms. I've got 2 kids and they're wonderful. They're fantastic. One is 10 and one is 17. The first time I experienced something that was close to depression, I probably would have described it more as like baby blues. You hear people use that term after they've had a baby. So when my oldest was born in 2009, I kind of was feeling a little sad, a little on the moody side, more tears than usual. But a lot of that was just kind of, okay, well, you got a lot of hormones going on and maybe a little bit of like loss of former pre-child life feelings as well. I didn't really tell anyone, and it didn't get any worse, and it went away pretty quickly. Fast forward to when I had my youngest in 2013, I was experiencing a lot of the same, really sadness, worry, crying, moody, and I was just so exhausted all the time. And I thought kind of the difference was, okay, well, I was caring for 3 other children, for, if you count my then husband, and I really powered through my days, and my nights were filled with these feelings of failure and guilt, and it just wasn't coming easy to me. And fortunately, I had a badass OBGYN, and she asked me the right questions at the right time. She asked how I was doing, like how, in addition to how is your body healing, how, you know, how are your energy levels. She asked me very specific questions about how is your brain thinking, how is your brain operating right now. And as she asked these questions, I decided to just be honest. Like, I told her I was experiencing this shame and these feelings and a lot of anxiety, really bordering kind of on panic at night. And that meant that I couldn't concentrate on things. And I would just forget stuff really easily. And I couldn't sleep, and I could barely eat. And it was just really overwhelming. And so I hadn't told anyone about it. And if anyone noticed, they didn't say anything to me. But she immediately, like, as I was verbal dumping on her, she immediately was like, hey, that's not normal, you know? And she asked some follow-up questions and asked if I'd heard of postpartum depression. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I've heard of postpartum depression, but I haven't had any thoughts of like harming my child or anything like that. I wasn't having any delusions or anything like that. She said, well, that's not postpartum depression, that's postpartum psychosis. Postpartum depression is really those feelings that you're feeling, that overwhelm, that just exhaustion, those feelings of shame and guilt and everything. And so she really saved me from that, because she described an antidepressant that was compatible with breastfeeding, which was something that was important to me. And she encouraged me to talk to more people and say, like, it's more common than you think. And if your family's been there too, they want to be there for you. And that really turned out to be super true, because I talked to my mom, and she was immediately like, oh yeah. And I'm like, what do you mean? Oh yeah. You know, that's not an oh yeah. And then I opened up a little bit at work, and I was talking to some coworkers, and they were just like, oh yeah. I'm like, no, no one talks about this. So it was one of those things that was the first time I had experienced depression. And I'm very grateful for my doctor. So many horror stories, so many medical horror stories. I have my own medical horror stories, but that particular doctor was a rock star and really, really asked the right questions at the right time. But that was my first experience with depression. And postpartum depression, you know, it's not the same as major depressive disorder or chronic depression, which I did experience a little bit later as well. But that was the first time was the postpartum depression.
Okay. So prior to that, you speaking with your provider, did you have a moment where you realized, like, hey, is something wrong? I have a problem and need help.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't. Not at that time, because I was thinking like, okay, well, this is just me feeling sorry for myself. And it's just hard. Like, it's just hard. Of course it's hard. You just had a baby. And so I was really pushing onto myself to say, this is not something I should be struggling. Like, I was saying, I shouldn't be struggling with this. What's wrong with me? Not, I shouldn't be struggling with this. How can I get help? It was very just like, why do I suck? And not, oh, this is not right. So it was a little on that side of things rather than I should talk to someone. It just happened to be someone talked to me at the right time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So how did you learn to manage your depression and just kind of keep a positive attitude along the way?
So I think to really talk about that, I probably should talk a little bit about kind of the major depressive disorder diagnosis that came later, because my postpartum depression was managed by medication. Within like a week of starting medication, I was responding to it. I was starting to feel better, and I got progressively better. And so that was very much a chemical brain imbalance that could be remedied with medication. Now, the next time I experienced kind of that onset of depression, was after the discovery of my ex-husband's first affairs, and that was in 2015. And I started going to therapy, not because I felt like I was having depression or anything, but because I was like, oh, this is not a normal thing to go through. Maybe I should talk to someone about it. And she did wind up diagnosing me with depression, and she prescribed some medications. Ultimately, she was a terrible therapist for many reasons. I think I went to 5 sessions with her, and then I was like, wow, therapy really sucks. I'm never doing this again. But the medication wasn't helpful. I essentially had to white knuckle it, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend just pushing through. Like if you get a therapist and you're like, oh, therapy sucks. It's not that therapy sucks. That therapist sucks. So I didn't go to therapy again until 2018. So that's 3 years later. And that was when I discovered the next and final set of affairs that my ex-husband had had. I, at that point, decided to try therapy again, not only to deal with that, but also because, like I said, my grandfather had gone missing in 2017. So I was like, all right, we've got that going on. We've got this going on. I think I need to deal with all of this. And it's now too much for me. My coworkers, my boss at the time was saying, like, take all the time you need. Also, here's resources through our employee assistance program. If you need to go talk to someone, like, there's ways to do that. And so just him sending me that like reminder was something that really got me back into therapy. And this therapist was awesome. Like, I'm so glad that I decided to try it again, because I legitimately believe that she saved my life. She gave me a more real diagnosis. Instead of just saying, oh, you're depressed, here's some medication. She's like, all right, there's different kinds of depression. What you have is major depressive disorder. What you also have is generalized anxiety disorder. But in addition to that, she listened to me. And when I told her, hey, I tried this medication and it doesn't seem to be doing anything, she's like, okay, that's fine. How about trying this non-medication related thing? Like, how about trying journaling? How about trying meditation? How about trying all these different things? And when I would say, like, hey, this worked or this didn't work, it was very much a collaborative effort to say, this is something that works for me and this is something that doesn't. And ultimately, for me, managing my depression has really come down to being aware of myself. And I don't just mean like mentally, I mean emotionally, physically, and mentally. What do I need? Spiritually, what do I need? And self-care is something that for me is very, very critical, very, very important. And so there's a couple of things that I do for self-care that aren't typical necessarily. Like gaming for me is self-care. I'm very intentional with my gaming time, and I use it to recharge. I use it to do a little bit of escape, a little bit of distraction. And then also I paint my nails every week. And that's something that I really take the time to sit and, like, I can't help anyone. If I'm painting my nails, I can't open a jar for you. I can't refill your water for you, any of that. So yeah, I mean, it really came down to like, what do I need? What's going to work for me versus here's a list of things to go try. So it's a lot of very much just kind of knowing myself, I would say.
I did notice your nails, by the way. I love nails too, as you can see. I feel lost
Yes,
without.
they're very sparkly.
I don't paint them myself, though. You don't want to see that. That would be a miss.
Okay, so Miss Mama Fox Fire, let me make sure I get it right. You kind of, as you talk, kind of went into the next line of questions that we're gonna go kind of get into, talking about the divorce. So you did eventually go through a divorce. So let's talk about that divorce and how it changed you.
Yeah, so I did mention the affairs already, and that is ultimately what led me to file for divorce. But when I discovered the last set of affairs in 2018, that was it for me. I wish I could say that it was the abuse I had experienced. I wish that was what had pushed me to file sooner. But the complete and honest truth of it is, it really was finding out that he had had more affairs on top of the ones I thought we had already kind of worked through. I feel like I've got a lot of regret around how long I stayed, but of course I'm grateful for my youngest child. So I can't say I wish I'd never gotten into the relationship in the first place, because I did get a really cool kid out of it. But I learned a lot from enduring everything that I did. And while I hope that no one has to go through trauma, and no one has to deal with abuse, and no one has to go through what I did, trauma causes a lot of issues, but it also holds a lot of lessons once you get through the hard part of healing. And that's so hard to realize. Like, that's so hard when you're in it, to say, okay, you're going to learn some stuff. You're going to learn some stuff about yourself. You're going to learn some stuff about interacting with other people. You're going to learn, you know, where your boundaries are. You're going to learn all these things, just not yet. You're going to get there. So, I mean, my marriage really took a toll on me, and I know 100% that divorce was the right answer, not only for me, but for the kids as well, because I stayed in 2015. I stayed, literally told myself, like, I'm going to stay for the kids, which you hear all the time. I'm going to stay for the kids. And I did. But kids pick up on those bad relationship dynamics. And it's much better to show them the healthy side of leaving. And that's one of the things that I really think changed for me, was that I am able to share things with my kids more openly. I'm able to talk about how I'm feeling more openly. I'm able to really be in the moment with them a lot easier, because I'm not dealing with all this other stuff on the side. And I have done a lot of work to rebuild my confidence. I went from being this like bubbly, outgoing, energetic 24-year-old to being this gray shell who just, I felt like it wasn't even worth trying to have friendships with or relationships outside of my marriage. And so I've done a lot of work to rebuild that. And one of the things that I've really learned is just not to let anyone dim your shine. If you feel like someone is dimming your shine, it's time to go find someone who appreciates you. You are not too much for someone else. You're not.
Cut them off.
Yep.
Right?
You don't need to change a thing.
All right, all right. That's $1 million conversation, right?
It is.
It is. Well, Miss Mama Fire, we're going to cut it here and bring you back and let our audience continue to hear your story. So,
Until next time.
there is strength in sisterhood.
And support in sisterhood.
Bye.
Bye.